Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are recording this program. My name is Janice Law. I'm the founder of 9-Year-Old American Women Writers National Museum, a nonprofit. We usually meet for lunch at the National Press Club, but everything changed with COVID. So now we're meeting on Zoom. This is our first Zoom meeting, so please be tolerant of our perhaps lack of technical skills. My husband, Don Jansen, is here to assist me. So welcome, everyone. When we did have luncheon, I wanted to do a brief plug. When we did have luncheon meetings at the National Press Club, we got a lot of donations during the meeting, during the luncheon meeting. But now that we're not having lunch there anymore, the donations, as with a lot of organizations, have fallen off. So if anyone would like to make a donation, you can go to the AWWNM website, www. American Women Writers National Museum. On the left-hand side, there are a series of boxes. One of them says contributions. Check on that, and you can donate by PayPal or with a credit card. And then it says contacts down below if you want to mail us a check. We would appreciate it very much. Before I introduce our speaker, Mary Jo Binker, I want to do a preview of coming attractions. In October, on October 28th, our speaker will be Donna Helper. She's a scholar of women in early radio. A lot of the very famous radio programs early on were written by women. Not surprising probably to anybody in this group, the women did not get enough credit for their work and their pioneering spirit. So we're going to hear about them there. And then in January, I have a speaker, Sarah Ford from Baylor University, and she is a national authority on Eudora Welty. I'm a big Eudora Welty fan, and so she's going to be speaking sometime in January. With Zoom, a lot more speakers are possible. Today's speaker is Mary Jo Binker. Mary Jo is an adjunct professor at, Mary Jo is an professor at George Mason University. She's consulting editor for the Eleanor Roosevelt Papers, a 5-volume documentary. She also has authored several books on historical women in the American military. And one of the things, people know a lot about Eleanor Roosevelt, but they don't know that she was a writer. She wrote a magazine column and a newspaper column, and that's going to be the subject matter today of Mary Jo Binker. We are limited by regulations on Zoom to 40 minutes. I don't know how strictly they enforce that, but to be free, it has to be 40 minutes. So Mary Jo has graciously agreed to try and limit her remarks to that. I don't think they shoot you or anything if you go over 40 minutes, but we're going to try and respect that. And so if you have questions for Mary Jo, we can't allow them now. You can email them to her. She's going to give you her email and her website, or you can email them to AWWNM1, where you made a reservation, AWWNM1@gmail.com, and I will forward them to Mary Jo. So without further ado, Mary Jo Binker, our speaker for today. Welcome, Mary Jo. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Janice. I'm delighted to be with you today to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt's career as a writer. This is an aspect of her life that is not often discussed. However, Eleanor Roosevelt thought of herself as a writer, and it certainly was the way she made money, particularly after she left the White House. As a writer, her output was prodigious. Most people, if they know anything about Eleanor Roosevelt's writing, immediately mention her syndicated column, My Day, which ran 6 days a week for more than 25 years in newspapers around the country. For most people, that would be prodigious enough. Oops, sorry. However, My Day was only the tip of the iceberg. Between 1921 and her death in 1962, Eleanor Roosevelt also wrote 27 books and almost 600 individual articles on a wide variety of topics, everything from marriage and family life to foreign affairs. She also wrote a monthly advice column for more than 20 years that appeared in 2 national women's magazines. It's this column that I want to focus on today, and this talk is based on my book, If You Ask Me, Essential Advice from Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt's column, If You Ask Me, was an idea before it was a column. The editors of the Ladies' Home Journal originally envisioned it as a way for the First Lady to combat the fake news of her day, the rumors, innuendos, and backstairs gossip, as one of her editors put it, about life in the White House, and also for her to answer other queries about which the public, rightly or wrongly, thinks it has a right to know. On a practical level, the editors thought a question and answer column would be easier to edit because they did not think Eleanor Roosevelt wrote very well. That was the plan. It didn't turn out that way because Eleanor Roosevelt and her readers soon turned the column into a two-way conversation about almost every aspect of American life. What makes this material unique is the back and forth quality of the conversation. You hear directly from individuals who are asking questions, and you hear Eleanor Roosevelt's answers, which are often direct and personal. Her replies were sometimes so direct and personal that the journal added a disclaimer to the column, saying that her views were not necessarily those of the magazine, or in the column's early years, the Roosevelt administration. I thought that what we could do today is eavesdrop a bit on the conversation. But first, a bit of context. When If You Ask Me first began in the spring of 1941, Franklin Roosevelt was in the early stages of an unprecedented third term. Europe was at war, and at home, the Great Depression was ending as the American economy geared up to become the great arsenal of democracy. It was a tense and difficult time, and Americans were jittery and afraid. Many of the first columns dealt with military and home front issues. Here are some examples. The first one comes from a military wife. Can you tell me why a soldier can get a furlough to see his dog when my husband can't get a furlough for the first time to see his 14-month-old son? Eleanor answers this way. My dear lady, it just happened that the soldier who went to see his dog was due for a furlough, and someone made a good newspaper story out of it. I am quite sure that no man would be given a furlough unless he is entitled to it, and the military needs of the area were such that he could be allowed to leave at the particular time when he made application. The paramount consideration in granting any furlough is the need of the military services, not the pleasure of the individual involved. The next one comes from a worried citizen. What assurance have people that defense bonds are safe? Under weak and unsound leadership, the bonds may not be redeemable later. Eleanor says, you must have faith in your own ability and that of the rest of the people of the country to choose sound leadership. There is certainly nothing else which you can rely on except the judgment of the people as a whole to make your government efficient. Incidentally, if United States bonds are not good, neither is anything else in the world, and you might as well reconcile yourself to it. Here is a reader asking about a rumor. Is it true that soldiers from Midwestern states, which are normally Republican, are sent into combat before soldiers from Democratic states? Eleanor replies, I have never heard anything so idiotic as your question. No soldier is asked what his politics are, and they would be so mixed in the unit that it would be utterly impossible to separate them. Anyone who believes such a statement as this should go at once to a psychiatrist. More than 350,000 women served in the military during World War II. Despite the fact that they were all volunteers who joined up for the duration plus 6 months, they often faced opposition from traditionalists who believed that women belonged at home. Here is a question about the prejudice they often faced. I have heard girls say they wouldn't think of joining the Waves or the WACs because they think that women who put on uniforms are aping men. What do you think of such a statement? Eleanor says, I think it is an utterly ridiculous statement. They are not aping men. They are wearing the kind of clothes which are suitable for the work they intend to do. If they do military work, they must of necessity wear military uniforms. If they work in a factory doing men's work, they will probably wear the type of garments which will make the work easier, and it is likely to be something like what the men wear. Here's a question about rationing. Don't you think corsets should be classed as necessary despite the rubber shortage? Eleanor replies, no, I imagine we shall find some kind of substitute which will serve to keep us self-like. And last and more poignantly, do you think women are wrong to plan to have babies in these times? Eleanor replies briskly, certainly not. If you have faith in the future of our civilization, you must be willing still to continue to do your share to populate the earth. Now we move to the early post-war period, which began for Eleanor with Franklin Roosevelt's sudden death in April 1945. World War II came to an end shortly thereafter. Peace was at hand, but the dropping of the atom bomb and the emerging Cold War with the Soviet Union did not inspire confidence in the future. At home, Americans were concerned that wartime prosperity would collapse without the stimulus of military production. Housing was in short supply, and inflation was rampant. The number of labor strikes also increased as workers sought higher wages. Social change added to the chaos. Women had left home to work in the factories or join the military. African Americans who had served with distinction in the military were coming home to segregation and discrimination. Other minorities were also facing poor living and working conditions. Like millions of other Americans, Eleanor Roosevelt had to adjust to both her new status and life in post-war America. She moved back to her home at Valkill, intending to continue to write and lecture as a private citizen. However, Franklin's successor, Harry Truman, had other ideas. In December of 1945, he appointed her to the first U.S. delegation to the inaugural session of the UN General Assembly. It was a job she would hold for 6 years and lead to her becoming the first chair of the UN's Human Rights Commission and one of the principal architects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Here are some questions from that period. We start with a reader worried about the economy. On every hand, you hear that our country is heading into a bad depression. Do you think this is true? What should be done to avoid it? Eleanor says, I do not think we need to have a bad depression. If our industrialists and economists learned their lesson in the 1930s, it cannot be prevented by greedy men. It must be prevented by men of great and unselfish vision who see that no one group can garner unto itself great resources and leave the mass of the people without their fair share. Here's a question that still resonates today. Do you think equal pay to women who fill men's jobs is economically justified? Eleanor replies, certainly, if women do the same work, I have always believed that they should receive the same pay. Here is a question about race that speaks to our contemporary concern about equality. What do you think the average person, white and black, can do to promote better understanding between the two races? Eleanor replies, I think for all of us, the first and most important thing is to face ourselves and our own prejudices and decide what we feel. Next, I think we should analyze whether what we feel is justified or not justified. If we feel it is not justified, either for personal or public reasons, then I think we should decide, taking into consideration our personal situation and the situation of our community, what are the ways in which we can help to promote good feeling in our community. Sometimes it is unwise to move too fast. It is always wise, I think, if you feel something is wrong, to try to stand up for what you believe is right. Here's another problem, this time from a male reader. I love and admire my wife, but there is one subject on which we can never agree. She thinks I should help with the dishes. Do you think this is a husband's work? Eleanor replies, I think anything connected with the home is as much the husband's work as the wife's. This silly idea that there is a division in housework seems to me foolish, when very often the wife earns money outside the home as well as the husband. Certainly, if there are children, the wife has two jobs, the one of being a mother and the other of being a wife. The kind of man who thinks that helping with the dishes is beneath him will also think that helping with the baby is beneath him. And then he is certainly not going to be a very successful father. The next question comes from a wife whose political views differ from her husband's. My husband says the Truman administration is a cesspool of corruption. How can I answer him? Eleanor replies, you can tell your husband that if the government is a cesspool of corruption, every individual citizen in the country is responsible when the government is a republic. Governments do not become corrupt unless their citizens have allowed low standards to exist. If you live in a democracy, you set the standards as the individual citizen. You elect your representatives, and the government belongs to you. You and I have to correct anything that is wrong, and we can always be heard. If anything is wrong, the blame is ours. Children often wrote to Eleanor. Here is a question from a concerned younger citizen. I am in the 6th grade. What can I do to make the world more peaceful? Eleanor replies, you can learn to live harmoniously with people of your own age, even though they might be of different races and different religions. If you do that, you will be preparing your generation to live better and more peacefully in the world as a whole. The next era begins in the early 1950s, after Republican President Dwight Eisenhower has been elected president, and Eleanor Roosevelt has returned to private life. The increasing prosperity of the 1950s eased Americans' financial worries, while at the same time heightening their social woes. Marriage rates had risen before and after World War II as young people hurried to exchange vows before shipping off to combat or married as soon as they returned. These young couples also had more children. The nation's birth rate rose from fewer than 20 births per thousand in the 1930s to more than 25 births per thousand in 1947. The increased birth rates, the rise of a youth culture characterized by discontent and rebelliousness, and concerns about juvenile delinquency made child-rearing questions more urgent at a time when child care experts, such as Dr. Benjamin Spock, were advocating a less authoritarian style of parenting. At the same time, divorce rates spiked, leading to uncertainty about how to deal with remarriage and blended families. Americans may have been more prosperous, but politically they were uneasy about possible communist subversion in American life. Some people even began to fear their neighbors, along with many other suspect groups that often included career public servants, activists in the labor and civil rights movements, educators, clergymen, librarians, and individuals working in the media. Civil liberties contracted as the belief took hold that the rights of the accused could be ignored because communism was thought to be so threatening to the American way of life. By 1953, Eleanor Roosevelt was firmly established as a trusted source and confidant for many Americans. Here are some of the questions from this period. We'll start with a question on birth control, which was a controversial topic in this period. Do you believe in Planned Parenthood? Eleanor replies, yes, I do, if it is not used as an excuse to shirk having a family. I believe that every married couple should have children if they are able to do so, but I believe that they should use intelligence so that the children will be healthy and the mother not physically exhausted. Of course, if it is against your religious belief, that is a different matter. But outside of that, it would seem sensible to plan intelligently for the family health and happiness. Here's one of my favorites. My husband wants my son to play football and I don't. Do you think that bodily contact sports, as he calls them, are necessary to the development of a boy's character? Eleanor says, I do not know that bodily contact sports are necessary to the development of a boy's character, but I do know that if a boy wants to play football and for any reason you keep him from it, you will probably find that his character, or his temper at least, will not improve. He will probably align himself with his father, and you will be left on the outside. So I advise you not to be too vocal about your feelings. And truth in advertising, I took this advice, and my child played football, and today he's a college football coach. So there you go. Here's one that many of us can identify with. My son and his wife are Republicans, but my daughter recently married a man who favors the Democrats. No matter how hard I try, I can't keep the two couples from getting into nasty political arguments. It ruins all their visits with me. Tell me, please, how you handle political differences in your family. Eleanor replies, I try to make them amusing. We have vast differences in our family. All of them love to argue. They can argue passionately about things they do not care about, and anyone who did not know them would think they were about to kill one another. But I find a little laughter and teasing, and if necessary, arbitrarily changing the subject, make our family gatherings rather entertaining. Here's one from a disgruntled reader worried about teenagers and the atom bomb. Don't you think the sex-crazy younger generation is a greater threat to civilization than the most powerful atomic bomb? Eleanor replies, I am afraid I don't come in contact with a younger generation which is sex-crazy. I find that the vast majority of our younger generation are fine boys and girls. They are young, of course, and make mistakes. So do we all. But I love and admire them. And I must say, I think I would compare them with the good that I hope can come out of the peacetime development of atomic power, but certainly not with its destructive powers. Teenagers saw Eleanor Roosevelt as an ally and often wrote to her. Here's a typical question from someone in that age group. One of my girlfriends wanted to meet the boy I go with, or did go with, and so I got her a date with a friend of his. Now she is going with my boyfriend, and I am left holding the bag. How can I win him back? Eleanor says, if I were you, I would not try to win him back. If he can be taken away so easily, I do not think his affections are very deep. I would be inclined to find someone else whom I liked. Perhaps you will find that the new boy is really more attractive than the old one, and I should hope he might have a stronger character. The final era coincides with the last years of Eleanor Roosevelt's life. By the late 1950s, a growing restlessness was simmering under the seemingly placid surface of American life. The Cold War, the burgeoning civil rights movement, the increasing visibility of poverty, and the rising frustrations of women and other marginalized groups were becoming more apparent. Nevertheless, the 1960s opened on a note of hopeful optimism, inspired in part by the election of a youthful president, John F. Kennedy. By the early 1960s, Eleanor Roosevelt was well into her 70s, but still maintaining a hectic schedule. Yes, she was writing fewer My Day columns, 3 a week instead of 6, but she was still traveling extensively and had added teaching and a monthly public affairs television program to her schedule. At President Kennedy's request, she had also become chair of the President's Commission on the Status of Women. She continued to be active in the civil rights and labor movements and the Democratic Party, and she was still writing If You Ask Me. By this point, she had been a public figure for almost 40 years. She had seen it all and done most of it. She was used to being in the public eye, and there were few questions that fazed her. Here are some of the queries from that period. About her age. Does it ever bother you that your age, a woman's traditional secret, is known to all the world? Eleanor replies, no, my age has been known for so long, it does not bother me at all. About her looks. How do you explain the fact that you've grown much better looking as you've grown older? Eleanor says, I thank you for the compliment. It simply means that as you grow older, people don't expect you to be as good looking as they expect a young person to be, so they are kinder in their judgments. Here is a question that draws on Eleanor's long relationship with her mother-in-law and gives a flavor of the language of the time. Do you think it is possible for two mature women, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, for instance, to live under one roof in peaceful coexistence? Eleanor says simply, I think it possible, but not probable. Here is a question from 1961 that displays Eleanor's political acumen. Would you care to make a long-range prediction and tell us who you think the Republican candidate for president will be in 1964? She replied, there undoubtedly will be some soul-searching in the Republican Party that may lead to the nomination of Mr. Rockefeller or perhaps Mr. Goldwater. Who knows? And as we all know, Barry Goldwater was nominated by the Republicans in 1964. Here is a question about women in politics that again reflects the times. Do you feel there is a double standard in politics? That is, are women candidates for office treated more gently by their opponents than men? Eleanor replies, I have watched a great many women in political life, and I think there may be more reticence in bringing up certain types of accusation against a woman. I have an idea, however, that if accusations have some foundation in fact, they won't be left out of a political campaign. When anyone, man or woman, goes into politics, I believe one has to develop a pretty tough skin and take for granted one will be treated no more gently than any other candidate. And lastly, men like Huey Long and Senator McCarthy have aroused fears of a man on horseback in the United States. Under what circumstances would we stand in danger of a dictatorship? And what would be the best ways for citizens to recognize the potential danger and oppose it? Eleanor replies, men who have the instincts for dictatorship are always a danger in any society. Free citizens must be constantly alert to preserve their liberties. In the United States, it is easy to discover a demagogue, but it sometimes requires courage to stand up immediately and say you don't agree with certain methods or certain ideas. However, if we want to preserve our liberties, we had better show that courage. It is the only way I know of to remain a free people. More than 50 years have passed since Eleanor Roosevelt wrote those words, and if you ask me, much has changed, yet much remains the same. Although we live in an increasingly wired world where events seem to move at warp speed and every day brings a fresh controversy, we still worry about our relationships, our children's upbringing, and how to make a living. Social issues like healthcare and abortion are still with us. Our domestic politics are increasingly fractious, and the world remains a dangerous place. The questions and answers, and if you ask me, remind us that even in times of tumultuous change, our essential hopes, desires, and worries remain constant. Perhaps that's why, after more than half a century, Eleanor Roosevelt's words remain so relevant and so powerful. Thank you.
Mary Jo, I'm just going to do this. Mary Jo, would you tell us please about your book and hold up a copy and give us your website and your email if you would like?
I would be happy to. This is the book. It's called If You Ask Me. I don't know, can you all see it?
Yes, yes.
Essential Advice from Eleanor Roosevelt. And it is a collection of the questions and answers from Eleanor Roosevelt's column.
Okay. And how may they purchase that? On Amazon?
Amazon. You can, and there are also links on my my webpage, maryjobinker.com. Okay. And if you click on books, it'll take you to a section on the books, and you can order it there.
Okay. Have you more than one book?
Yes, I do. Actually, hang on 1 minute. This is my second one, which just came out last November. Oh. This is called What Are We For? Mm-hmm. And the words and ideals of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And this is based on a wider selection of her writings.
Okay.
The first book was just based on one column, but this is based on a wider section.
Okay. Does it cover a different historical period as well? Or?
No, it covers the same period because, you know, she lived when she lived, right?
Okay.
1884 to 1962.
And we have a couple extra minutes. How did you get interested in the subject of Eleanor Roosevelt?
Well, I think I was always interested. My husband used to say that if I was upset, the way to calm me down was to ask questions about Eleanor Roosevelt. And I would get so busy telling him about Eleanor Roosevelt, I would forget what I was upset about. And when I went to graduate school in history, we had to do an internship. And one day, the editor of the Eleanor Roosevelt papers came to our class to talk about her program. And of course, I was like first person in line after class to say, yes, I will come and work for you. Please let me come and work for you. So I started as a student intern, and I just stayed.
Okay. And what was your first time you remember hearing about Eleanor Roosevelt?
The first time I ever heard about her?
Yeah. How old were you, and how did you happen?
Oh, how old was I? You know, I remember listening to my parents talk about the Roosevelts. And one day we were out near where my father had gone to high school. And they were reminiscing about how they had stood there as teenagers on the sidewalk, waiting for their motorcade to go by. They were visiting in Portland, Oregon in the 1930s. And so that was, I think that was kind of my first introduction and kind of really fired my imagination.
And so you pursued that beginning what age about would that be?
Oh, well, actually now we're going to talk about age.
I
actually went to graduate school in my 40s with an 8-year-old. I don't recommend anybody doing this, but I did go to graduate school in history. And I got my master's degree, and then I went to work for the Eleanor papers. But prior to that, I had a 20-year career in advertising and public relations and journalism.
Oh, great!
So I'm really kind of on my second career now.
Good. Well, we loved hearing from you. I wish we could take questions, but I mentioned at the beginning that Zoom has if the program's to be free, it has a 40-minute limit. I don't know how strictly they enforce that because I'm just starting out on Zoom, but just in case they are, we are going to conclude it at around 40 minutes. And we thank you very, very much. I noticed we have another distinguished Eleanor Roosevelt person in the audience, Miss Beasley. And so she's also speaks, I believe she spoke at one of our lectures. So we're happy to have everybody who attended. Thank you so much. And again, give your email again and your website, Mary Jo.
If you want to contact me, just go to maryjobinker.com, all one word. And there's a contact button, and you can put your questions right there, and they will come to me.
Okay, I'm sorry we didn't have a chat button today to use that, but somehow it's my debut on Zoom. We couldn't find it. I couldn't find the chat button. But next month, when we have someone speaking on early women in radio, I'm going to find the chat button. We're going to hear some early radio programs as well. So thank you so much, Mary Jo. I appreciate everyone who attended. And I'm going to sign off now. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great.
Yes, thank you so much. So I press
Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.